The breakout player of 2023 will be that and more this week on the couch. Dwain McFarland, welcome back. The breakout player of 2023 will be.
It will be Tony Pollard. Yeah. I struggle with that one, Sig, because he kind of already broke out. But like when I mean breakout, like take a huge step forward, right? And just looking at Pollard, like based on the research and everything that I do, like, I do these profiles. Folks can check them out over on fantasylife.com. They're free and I tier every player. But the way that I tier these guys out is really based on multiple factors. But number one, right, is their talent in the running game and in the passing game. Then you have their utilization pedigree, meaning like have coaches trusted them in those situations in the past. Then the next thing is like, okay, really, is there any challenge here on the depth chart? And if there's not, right, that can cause you to re-challenge your assumptions around their roles in the past, because sometimes it's just about like CMC wasn't an every down back until Jonathan Stewart was gone. Alvin Kamara was not an every down back until he was, once Mark Ingram was gone. So when you look at Tony Pollard and the quality, right, of the offense that he gets to play on with the Cowboys, everything lines up. This is an explosive playmaker. 16% plus of his carries have gone for 10 plus yards. Well, that was last year. His career average is 13%. Those are at RB1 thresholds. Those are well over RB1 thresholds, like missed tackles forced, yards after contact. Everything has been great for Pollard. So we know the talent's there, but now we get more opportunity because you don't have that contract for Zeke Elliott, where the ownership feels that, well, we better really get, Zeke his looks. The Cowboys coaches aren't dumb. Like they've known, right, that Pollard was the guy that they should probably have on the field more. But, just like in any job, Sig, as we were talking about, doesn't matter, healthcare system, whatever, there's politics. There are politics in play. And now those politics have been, cleared up. So I feel absolutely wonderful about Tony Pollard. I think he has RB1 overall upside. You're getting him at the end of round 2.
Right.
You're getting him in round 3 in redraft and best ball. I haven't checked, his Dynasty ADP, Sig. I know we were going to talk some Dynasty today. I didn't look at it before I came on. It doesn't matter. Like Tony Pollard, top 3 this year.
If he's only compelling enough to go in the late second round in best ball redraft, then his Dynasty price is reasonable enough that you can overpay for him. And if indeed everything lines up, then you're going to be happy you got him at his price rate now, even if it's an overpay compared to what the perceived price is, which just a quick punctuation mark for this. So I assume you're in a high stakes league, you draw pick 11, pick 12, you're into the first round. You're reserving one of your early second round picks for Tony Pollard?
Oh, I will. Yeah, absolutely. Now, again, it depends on how many I'm playing in, right? So like if I'm going to do 50 drafts, then I'm going to play the ADP game a little more, with Pollard. But if I'm drafting 150 and he stays down at that other end, I'm probably still going to mix in Pollard at the 1-2 turn just to kind of get him with some different player combinations.
Right.
Because if he goes nuts, right, we know how much of this game still just comes down to variance and luck with health and all those sort of things. So if you draft him down at the end of the 1-2 turn, the combination of players you get with him in later rounds is much different than if you draft him, at the end of round 2, beginning of round 3. So I would definitely mix it up early on. I've just played the ADP game. It's like, oh, you're going to let me take Cooper Kupp in round 1. I'm passing CMC, by the way. I'm just like, okay, I know I can get Pollard in round 2. CMC, the Elijah Mitchell splits scare me enough. CMC's upside is still tremendous. 24.5 points per game in the games last year where you didn't have to worry about Mitchell. But once Mitchell was around, like you're more at that 16.5 mark, which is fine, but that's not what you want to pay an RB1. You don't want to pay a top 5 pick for that, especially when receivers can stay healthier and they're going to be around that, right? You get Tyreek Hill, you got Cooper Kupp there, obviously Ja'Marr Chase and Justin Jefferson are the first 2 guys off the board in most drafts. But if I can get one of those receivers, throw Tyreek Hill in that mix as well. Give me one of those receivers. Heck, Sig, you could talk me into Travis Kelce in the mix there.
Sure.
Give me one of those receivers or Travis Kelce and let me come back and take Tony Pollard in the mid to late second. And then turn around. You're really going to let me have a shot at like a Ramondre Stevenson. It's crazy. These running back prices, these guys we're getting in the 3rd round now, Sig. And I get it. Zero RB's real. There's benefits to passing on running back and taking them later. There's so many more paths if their starter gets hurt. That's all they need. They don't even have to be that good to score some fantasy points. But these are guys that would have been like Josh Jacobs 7 or 8 years ago, Sig. What pick would he be right now in fantasy drafts?
First round pick. I mean,
yeah, like a top 5 pick.
Yeah.
He's going in the
3rd.
Early to mid 3rd.
Yeah.
So And don't be wrong, you can pick apart Jacobs. Like, what's going to happen with Garoppolo? Are the Raiders just going to be a complete dumpster fire? There's a lot of there's more questions with him than Pollard, which is why I named Pollard. Right.
Right.
Of course, we're talking breakouts too. But like, man, you let me take Tyreek Hill, come back with Tony Pollard, and get Ramondre Stevenson. Right. Or if you want to talk Josh Jacobs, one of these other guys, I feel like it's a tremendous start. And then I can just forget about running back, honestly, for a while and just grab all my receivers, grab, a tight end if I want, grab a quarterback. I don't even have to touch running back again until round 10 if I take that strategy.
Yeah, and in a high stakes league, not a best ball league. Because in a best ball, it gets a little trickier because you can cobble
It
together
does.
committees at running back and be okay. But yeah, where you're wanting to set your lineup every week, getting that position taken care of early in the draft. Worst case scenario, or maybe you'll say there ain't nothing bad about that. What if Zeke comes back to the Cowboys? What if they bring him back on a veteran minimum contract?
Yeah, I think that could still happen. It's kind of lost a little bit of its steam here lately. It was picking up with some of the local beat reporters, I don't know, about a month ago. I live here in Dallas, so I listen to this stuff every day. And even if he comes back, I'm honestly not very worried because I really think a big part of Zeke's playing time tied to the fact they paid him so
Right,
much.
right.
I don't believe Zeke will have the same role that he had last year. I think Tony Pollard will take over most of the passing down work. You could see, look, Tony Pollard is interesting because I don't think he needs 300 rushing attempts, Sig, to finish as the number
No.
one RB in fantasy. I think 220. He had 190. What was it? 193
Mhm.
last year. So 225, right, is fine. And guys, give me a break. Like, I have so many people, man, he can't do it at his size. I'm like, he's 207. That's bigger than CMC was when he had every carry, right?
Right.
Basically for the Panthers in his huge seasons. That's a little bit smaller than Alvin Kamara, but it's bigger than Austin Eckler. It's bigger than Jamal Charles was when he was, banging out, top 3 RB seasons. So I think the size stuff, is overrated. Would the Cowboys like to keep him fresh, and might Zeke give them a little more confidence than who they have now to keep him fresh? I would say so, but I would still think 225, 235 rushing attempts and an opportunity, to still catch like 70 balls would be there. You give me 300 touches from Tony Pollard this year, and I'll just say let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, you're right that a running back with Pollard's outlook should be a late first round pick. And that's his
Yeah.
maybe even with the running back landscape this year, maybe even a mid first round pick. And you have on one hand the glass half full, glass half empty, sort of the empirical take. What Adam Harstad pointed out last week, he hasn't done it. I mean, he hasn't even remotely done it. He hasn't even remotely done anything like hold up for 300 touches or 250 touches. I mean, well, I guess maybe I don't know, we had last year close to 250 maybe, but because you're not talking about a player like say Bijan Robinson, you say, well, he hasn't done it. Yeah, but Bijan Robinson has done it at
Yeah.
UT.
Yeah, he did it in college.
Tony Pollard,
Pollard's never done it in college
yeah.
either. Yeah.
So it's just an empirical take. We haven't seen him do it yet. But you could also say, on the other hand, the glass half full part of that is he has a lot of tread on his tires, so his body hasn't absorbed a lot of punishment to make it more difficult for him to do that. Okay, let's stay. And in the interest of full disclosure, Dwayne sent me a list of players. We were talking about breakout players, so I do have some clues. But what's funny, and this is one of those, I'm going to put myself on the couch here, Dwayne. So many times I have the right situation, the wrong player. Sometimes it's not even the wrong player. It's just there's an injury or things happen. A player shoots himself in the foot as far as getting in the doghouse or something.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
you gave me some specific players, but it makes me want to talk about situations. Let's talk about the Buffalo backfield.
Yep.
So I'll just again, spoiler alert, you like James Cook. So they signed Damian Harris, they signed Latavius Murray, because I'm trying to figure this out because all of these players have pretty attractive ADPs. Jamal Williams looms, right? You see what in an efficient offense, even a running back who's not full time, who has the right role, can do for your fantasy team. So why James Cook? Do you have any fascination with Harris or Murray? What does the Buffalo backfield for 2023 look like in your crystal ball?
Yeah, I think Harris and Murray it's kind of crazy how close their contracts are.
Yeah.
Like, once you look at it, you would think, oh, Harris is probably like 3x Murray. No, they're really close. But I think when you look at them stylistically, they fit a role. And when you look at James Cook and you look at Nyheim Hines, they stylistically fit a role. Now, I think James Cook can do more between the tackles and things like that than what you're probably going to want to put Nyheim Hines through. But I think they kind of have, all right, no matter what, we've got a 2 down early banger that can score touchdowns. We can use them inside the 5 yard line, all those things. And I like, for the record, I like Damian Harris at ADP. A lot of these things come back to ADP as well, right?
Right.
So when you're talking about best ball right now, which is where we've got the best ADP, thanks to Underdog. And I mean, there's a gazillion drafts every day. And like basically we're running on 2 day averages because they have so much data. Like you look at James Cook, it's just really about the underlying data points. And you're right. So whenever I tier these running backs, what pops for James Cook are all of the underlying metrics, right? Missed tackles force per attempt, right? 21%. The league average is 17%. So he's at an RB1 threshold based on comparing him to other RB1s over the last 3 years. Yards after contact, 3 yards. So that compares to RB1s over the last 3 years. 13% of his carries went for 10 plus yards or more. That's actually better. Now, he was on a smaller sample, so you give that a little bit of a, some of these things you got to be careful with the small samples. But overall, he was a second round pick. He did some nice things in college, and it translated at the next level on the sample we have. The passing game work, though, is like what gets me really excited because he was actually real. So 26% target rate. So that's targets per route run. That's elite. That's like right there at that CMC, Kamara, Austin Eckler level. This is a guy that also, what I've found, Sig,
Mhm.
historically, is guys that are at a plus A dot and have these really high target rates. It's more sticky year over year. And it's because they have a much better chance to be completely integrated into the passing game. And what I mean by that is if you can run a yard, a route that's 4 or 5 yards down the field, and it's in combination maybe with a tight end that's running a seam route. Well, now you're basically the second read and a high-low read if the quarterback's reading the middle, of the field first. Whereas if you're a negative A dot player, what that often is, oh, Stephon Diggs is covered, Dawson Knox is covered, Gabriel Davis is covered. Oh, let me check it down. Right. That's what Damian Harris could do. Like he can catch a check. Most backs, funny enough, they can actually catch
Yeah.
passes. I don't know why people get so hung up.
Right.
Most of them can actually catch. It's a matter of can they do it? Can they integrate catching the football into the next levels of the field, right? That make them, bigger parts of the game plan. So Cook checks that box as well. He had a 2.3 A dot, which is really good for a running back. So folks that don't know what that is, average depth of target. Yards per route run was RB1 level at 1.43. So all the underlyings, rushing and in the receiving game, his performance says this guy could be an RB1, right? Now, has he done it before? Back to Adam's question. Empirically, like, no, he is not. And the Bills have always, pretty much had a committee. But where you can get James Cook, in drafts, he's kind of been forgotten. You're getting him around 8 or 9 right now on Underdog. And it's just the kind of profile that everything works out right. I like it. I also think, and it didn't work out last year, but I think guys like this that have that plus A dot, like a CMC. Remember back in the day,
Yeah.
everybody's like, oh man, Cam Newton's not going to throw the ball to CMC. I don't know why you guys are so excited. But I'm like, well, there are exceptions when someone's really good at these things,
Right.
like CMC, right? And they can be fully integrated into the passing attack. Like even though Cam was a scrambler, like he still decided to throw the ball to CMC. Like quarterbacks aren't dumb. Like if Josh Allen looks to his right and sees like you or me, Sig, standing in the
Mhm.
flat, like he's just gonna scramble because he's like, I'll get more yards than Dwayne. But like if James Cook is already 5, 6, 7 yards downfield and I can hit him instead of scrambling, well, now like you change the math, right, in
Mhm.
the equation. So
Mhm.
the Bills are a pass heavy team. They're a team that's going to score a lot of points. Vegas loves them again this year. So I think those are the positives. But the negative is like utilization, from a standpoint of, having that pedigree, showing us that coaches really trust him in those scenarios. No, I mean, he was only on the field for 21% of the Bills dropbacks last year. And that's the area we were betting on him, making us hay in fantasy last season. And so we're putting the chip down again because the talent says it's there. Will the Bills do it? Can't say, but I think ADP is fair on it given the upside you might get.
Yeah, it's the classic Dwayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck's going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you mentioned the term talent. I always like to say talent creates opportunity, and talent creates opportunity means that we can't look at the way these backfields are divvied up or the usage of a player, because what you're talking about is efficiency or the ability to create production out of opportunities, targets per route
Yes.
run, but we just need the number of touches, the number of snaps to go up to really take
Yeah.
advantage of that.
And to be clear,
Yeah.
like historically, running backs are the hardest position to get talent to project touches because coaches just do
Right.
weird stuff.
Well, they have
Receiver, it's a must.
right.
Receiver, you can get on the field, and here's the easiest way I think about it. Like, if tomorrow, knock on wood, we don't want any players, to get hurt. But if tomorrow, you know, Derrick Henry popped up, as someone that, whatever. I'm not even gonna say a specific injury. He's
Sure.
out.
Just something happened.
Tajay
He retires
Spears.
because he wants to open
Yeah,
a
yeah, he
a
retires.
dental
Let's keep it
floss
like that.
farm in
Yes,
Montana.
yes. See,
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, but Tajay Spears probably climbs like 10 rounds
Right.
in ADP. If tomorrow, like name me another situation here, you were talking about the Chiefs, Travis Kelce goes
Right.
down. MVS is not climbing 10 rounds because even though he can run routes,
Right.
it doesn't mean he can earn targets. So at receiver, like basically, if you don't have talent, it's over. It
Right.
doesn't matter if you
Right.
get on the field. Like it just there's too many variables, and it just doesn't work. At running back, you may not be one of the best, but all of a sudden, two people in front of you are hurt, and you're the RB3 for the last 8 weeks of the season.
Right.
If you're on the right team, like you talked about situation, if you're with Mike Vrabel, and he wants to run the football no matter who's back there, well, then that's a really good situation for you. So just thought I would throw that in.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's the easiest position, running back, to say it's just being a warm body on the roster
It
can
gets handed to you.
right. It
The
gets
ball
handed
is
to you.
literally handed to you.
Well, and
So
what pops into my head when you talk about that, Dwayne, is how many first round running backs we've seen continue to get opportunities after it's clear they can't really play, versus first round wide receivers that teams will move on from them faster. And I think part of it is also because running back is an attrition, an accumulation position, whereas wide receiver, the spotlight's on you 5, 6, 7, 9 plays a game, and if you aren't converting on those plays, they're going to get impatient really quickly. So what makes sense from a narrative point of view for James Cook is the Bills are an organization that doesn't usually throw rookies into the fire. There's some organizations that you can look at rookie usage and you can say, well, maybe they're not that high on him, or maybe they had plans for him and he isn't fulfilling it. But I think the Bills the Bills loved Gabe Davis. It took them 3 years to really give him a full opportunity. Now we'll see what he does this year with that. But with James Cook, I think it just makes sense that they would say, okay, year 2, you're ready to take more on. And then it's up to him to solidify that.
and to your point, he
Yeah.
could fumble it away. There's a
Sure.
lot of weird things that
Sure.
happen.
I mean,
I go back to David Wilson, man, all the time in my head
oh,
that when he fumbled and what do you Grandpa
right,
Werther's? Is that
right,
what you call him?
right,
Tom
right.
Coughlin
Yeah, he did
took
not
the
get a
candy
Werther's.
jar away.
Yeah. Well, and you can, alternatively, you can also look at a player like Arian Foster. I remember I was all over Arian Foster like one year in week 16. I think it was his rookie year.
Yeah.
And he was, and I believe he almost fumbled away the opportunity, but then he's Arian Foster. He's really good. My brain
Yeah.
might be deceiving me because it does that sometimes.
No,
So
you're right. He did finish strong at the end of that year.
yeah,
I don't know for sure if it was week 16. Your memory's better than mine, but he
yeah.
definitely closed that year out with like a 4-game stretch that put him on the map for us the next year.
Arian Foster was one. Sometimes it's information. See,
God, I loved Arian
where
Foster.
he's a classic Matt Waldman curvilinear movement guy.
Mm,
Also a real interesting cat, to say the least. But I remember with
yeah,
Arian
very.
Foster, the stuff you hear. One of the things I remember hearing was just that the coaches were not going to bat for him, and that's why he fell out of the draft. Draft capital is a funny thing. Draft capital can mean a lot of different things. James Cook's case, it means the Bills liked him. So we talked about. Let's talk about one more running back, mainly because I just want to get sweaty and
Real quick, why would any coach from a big program not want to support their player? Like, the more guys you get drafted sooner, the better it is for like your recruiting, right?
Yeah, it's complicated.
I don't know.
I mean,
You're right.
you might
complex.
hear some stories out there about, I don't know, Ohio State quarterbacks and what the program tells people about them, but I'm not going to be one to pass those stories on. You're right. It doesn't make sense, but it's tough, right? Because some of these things, like Tony Pollard not getting used as much as Ezekiel Elliott, didn't make sense. What's the reason? Well, it's the money. I think you were right to point that out, that a $1 million Ezekiel Elliott is not a compelling option. But when Jerry Jones says we're paying that guy, whatever, 12, 14, $16 million, we're going to use him.
I honestly hope they sign Zeke. I would love
It
to get
makes
like another round.
sense.
I would like
Why
to
wouldn't
see
you?
another round discount on Pollard. Pollard will fall in
Yeah.
ADP
Yeah.
if they sign Zeke because people just they're going to gravitate to that.
Yeah, they're gonna react.
So I would love to see that.
Okay, I know that people reacted to the Detroit draft. I'm one of the very few people, Dwayne, that will say, "I like Detroit's draft." I think Detroit's draft made a lot of sense. I think Detroit's draft shows clarity. I think Detroit's draft shows they know what they value in their scheme. They know what they value in players. I think they have a real clear idea of their culture and the kinds of people that fit in their culture. And even if you didn't like the Jahmyr Gibbs pick because it was a running back, is he a running back? Well, that's part of the discussion. Is he a running back? Uh, I know that Jahmyr Gibbs is one of those players that, again, there are players we can look at their ADP. We mentioned James Cook. We mentioned Tony Pollard. You should have a position, right? Because the ADP kind of splits the difference between the optimistic and
Yeah.
pessimistic. So the
Yep.
one position that doesn't seem valid is, yeah, that's about right. No, either they're being underdrafted because people are thinking about the pessimistic position too much, like with Tony Pollard, or they're being overdrafted because people are too excited. Uh, Really, I just want to bring up Jahmyr Gibbs because I want to say I like the Lions draft. I like what the Lions are doing, and I think that whether it's Jahmyr Gibbs or your other favorite pieces of the Detroit Lions offense, this was already a hyper efficient offense, and I think that you number one are in year two of this offense. There was already some comments about now we can really start to unlock some of the things in this offense, and because it's in year two with the kinds of players they want, the elements that they want, right? They've made upgrades. After 6 games, they'll have Jamison Williams and so on, and they have a good offensive line. So I look at Jahmyr Gibbs or really almost any Lion as someone you want to look at to potentially produce well over their ADP, because this looks to me like an offense that was already at a pretty high stratosphere in terms of efficiency that could take yet another step. Gibbs being part of that. I know Gibbs is a player. You basically have him as an instant breakout player. What do you see?
Yeah, for sure. And, just real quick to touch on some of the context that, really good stuff that you're laying out there. Vegas is seeing it the same way, and it's not to say that Vegas is perfect on these things, but it's definitely an indicator that we want to look at. And, some sites have already released like their lines for every game. And so, like, nerdy me, like, just,
Hmm.
oh,
Hmm.
new data, let me dive in.
Yeah.
Well, right now, if you look at the projected team totals, right, which we get by looking at the spread and we look at the over under in the game, and we can say, okay, this is what Vegas projects this team to score. On average, right now, they've got Detroit pegged as the sixth highest scoring team in the league at 24.6 points per game, which is actually, they were fifth last year. So Vegas is on them again. I agree, like with everything you said about like the maturation of the roster, some of these other young stars. But specifically with Gibbs, it's back to that profile, right? The archetype that we're looking for. Historically, if you go back and you look at if you look at the backs that really smash, right, and have a chance to just turn into, like, if you get it right, it can be the RB1 overall,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so there's some things that have to happen for that. We touched on some of them with Pollard, right? You've got to be an explosive playmaker. You can't be Najee Harris and do this. Now you can still be a good running back and be Najee Harris, but you can't get into this profile group. You have to be an absolute beast in the passing game. And Jahmyr Gibbs showed that he was that in college. In fact, I have something over at Fantasy Life called the Supermodel, and I do it for each position: wide receiver, running back, and for tight end. And looking at Gibbs in the supermodel, like his two closest comps, and this is just based on data, folks. This isn't based on like hand picking anyone. Alvin Kamara
Hmm.
and Christian
Hmm.
McCaffrey.
Hmm.
If we look at their ability to earn targets, and also the other thing is, I'll hear, well, Gibbs just never was given a full time role as a runner. Well, neither were those guys in college.
Right.
Those guys were not getting 80% of their team's rushing attempts. So, like, when you look at this stuff, you got to go back and look at context historically, like what these other players have done as well. And so those are his closest comps. But like, if you look at his targets per route run, he's a little bit below Kamara and McCaffrey, 25%. That's elite. Versus other collegiate players that have been drafted, back since 2017. That's how far I have this particular data back to. But McCaffrey was at 27%, Kamara 33%. So Gibbs was there at 25%. Yards per route run, he was right in line with both of those guys. And the coaches trusting him, meaning how often did he run a route when his teams dropped back to run a pass play in college? 44% of the time. Kamara was at 34%. Christian McCaffrey was at 39%. So from a way the coaches used him in college, from the way he performed, was very similar as a receiver. And so the other thing I look at, Sig, is okay, the Lions, for whatever reason, they didn't like DeAndre Swift, right? He didn't run to the right hole, gap. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of rumors, right, as far as what was going on. He also battled injuries, but in the end, DeAndre Swift was a talented player. Jahmyr Gibbs is a more talented player based on his collegiate profile. But where I'm going with this is DeAndre Swift, who could never lock down a full-time role for whatever reason and basically just played the ancillary back, finished as a top 24 running back every
Mhm.
season in Detroit. People act like DeAndre Swift was a complete bust. Like his points per game in fantasy were still good, especially given like how limited they kept him. It like didn't give him the carries inside the 5, all that kind of stuff. So when I look at Gibbs, I'm like, okay, so the floor is that. They for some reason don't like him the way they did DeAndre Swift, which is probably not going to happen with how high of a draft pick they spent on him. I'm pretty sure they're all in on Gibbs. I mean, anything can change, right?
Yeah.
Subject to change. But when you look at his ability in the passing game, you look at how good DeAndre Swift already was in a minimal role, then you have to ask yourself, okay, what if Jahmyr Gibbs actually is exactly what they want?
Right.
And they want to put him in, 60% of the workload. Now, David Montgomery's there this year. And I do think with what they paid him, he's going to have a role. I don't expect Gibbs to come in and just take over the whole backfield this year. But you have to remember, Alvin Kamara didn't even get 30% of the rushing attempts for the Saints in his first year because they had Mark Ingram. And to start the year, they had Adrian Peterson. He finished as the running back 3.
Yeah.
Why? Because he had so many outs. He's a big playmaker. He can still catch the ball. And on the few touches they did give him on the ground, he was still electric. And I think that's what you're getting with Gibbs. CMC was the same way. Jonathan Stewart, I think, had like 60% of the rushing attempts his rookie year. I want to say CMC didn't even get to 40%, right around there, his rookie season. And he was still a top 12 rookie running back. So he's very similar talent profile. So that's kind of the range, that I give Jahmyr Gibbs. If you're in Dynasty, I mean, I'd probably draft him as the RB2 off the board. I mean, I
Yeah.
would take Bijan first, and I would take Jahmyr Gibbs second.
Overall. Yeah.
Like,
Not in
that's
a
how
rookie
good
draft.
yes, overall.
Not in a rookie
Overall,
draft. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Not in a
Same order in the rookie draft, just happens to work out in this
Yeah.
case. But yes, overall, I
Yeah.
would I would take Jahmyr Gibbs second. Um, Obviously, if it's not a super flex, we always got to throw that in now. I love the super
Yeah.
flex;
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
more popular now.
Right.
But I think once you look at that range, and Sig, once the season starts, chaos happens. What if David Montgomery gets hurt?
Oh, yeah. He'll
And people are
probably
like,
miss a
well, what
few
if he
games.
comes
Yeah.
back? Like if Montgomery gets hurt and misses 3 or 4 games, there's a chance like he doesn't get the role he had when he
Well,
comes back. Like there's just a lot of paths here for Gibbs to just hit big.
and you're getting me excited. You're making me want to like say, okay, we're gonna go less than an hour, so I can go and like get in some
So
drafts
you
and
can go
take Jahmyr
draft.
Gibbs. Well, because he's not expensive because
Yeah.
he's not very
Yeah, round
expensive.
4 right now on
Yeah.
Underdog. Like he's my of backs that go, in the first 10 rounds, like he by far is my player I have the most exposure to. Pollard second.
Yeah, you can get him. You can build your draft around knowing, like, okay, if I get Jahmyr Gibbs, so mix and match. But I love the way you laid out. I think the simplest case, if for folks that are up on fantasy football, is just to say, like you said, DeAndre Swift was a top 24 running back in this role. Now it's going to be a more efficient offense, a more explosive player that the team loves. So we have nowhere to go but up. And he if he
Versus
doesn't,
maybe hates. We're not sure.
yeah,
Like
no,
it
well, I
was
mean
with
that's the
Swift.
whole thing.
There's definitely some bad mojo there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, the thing is that in fantasy football, whether you realize it or not, we're always making predictions on incomplete data. Always.
Yeah.
That's what fantasy football is. You're like, well, we don't know yet. Well, we never really know. And the other thing is, and I think that Emery Hunt was one of the first ones to point this out, but you mentioned Alvin Kamara. Don't discount the boost that a player like Gibbs gets playing on that fast track in Detroit. So again, explosive plays.
And did Dan Campbell overlap with Kamara? He overlapped. Yeah, Dan Campbell
Yeah,
was
yeah,
with Kamara.
absolutely.
He was part of that coaching tree under
Absolutely.
Sean Payton.
Yeah. I
So
mean, look, they
he
had a
got that going
plan.
too.
They had a plan and they executed their plan. They got players that exactly fit what they wanted. And
Yeah.
I think that you mentioned, just to put a punctuation mark on what you said about, hey, what if David Montgomery goes down? Look, if you're doing weekly projections, then if David Montgomery's out, you're probably projecting Gibbs as a top 3 or top 5 running back that week.
Because he's the archetype we want.
Yeah.
And that's why I look at these archetypes. He checks all the boxes. He's not just a good runner, not just a good receiver. He's both.
Yeah.
And so when you have both of those and then opportunity falls into your lap, especially
Yeah.
when you're a guy the team has invested heavily in. Like, just you can do the math. Like,
Yeah.
things add up really quickly.
Yeah, he could be a league winner. So I love that. Anything where we're doing positive Detroit Lions talk, I love it. And I think that we've got a lot, like you said, there's so many stories you can tell. And like you said, I mean, you debunked this idea. What if he only gets 30% of the carries? So what? So what? It just means there's more upside. There's even more upside there. David Montgomery can stay healthy, score 15 touchdowns, have 220, 230 carries, and Jahmyr Gibbs can still be a massive hit at
Yeah.
ADP. And remember, I always like to point this out. If you're in a highly efficient offense, the number of touches doesn't matter as much because it's just the opportunities that you get, and especially when you're an explosive player like him. Okay, looking at your wide receivers, I thought one interesting thing that jumped out at me, Dwayne, you
Yes.
have 3 wide receivers in the list you sent me of potential breakout wide receivers that all have, not great quarterback situations. Christian Watson, Drake London, Treylon Burks. Um, so tell me a story. Pick any one, all 3, or answer the question just in a vague, general way. Um, what why do the quarterback situations not make you want to tap the brakes on these guys when we're looking at this 1-year window for their production curve?
Yeah. Yeah. And so quarterbacks, here's what I'll say. Like, they do matter for wide receivers, but like at a macro level, honestly, your quarterback play doesn't even hardly pick up signal.
Hmm.
And so when we look at fantasy, like, there's two things we have to do. Number one, we have to look at, okay, what are the things that actually correlate really highly to fantasy points? That's number one. But then number two, you've got to look at, so for example, with that, like, a team's passing yards will correlate to how many yards a player has in a year. But your next question is, well, how, steady are team passing yards year over year, right? And you can get to multiple ways you can slice and dice this, but that next component is like, how steady, like, is that number? Does it actually repeat year over year? So once you figure those two things out, then you basically run your analysis, and the things that really show up strongly in both areas, like, those become the top things that you start rating your players on. And we talked about wide receivers early, how talent really is the number one driver. And so what happens is talent's number one. And the two things that you want to look at the most for receivers, there's a lot of things you can look at, but the two things that pick up the most signal, that are the most steady year to year, is their ability to earn targets. So you can say targets per game, target share, those are huge. They highly correlate to fantasy points. And then their air yard share, right? So if you're a low A dot player, you better have a really big target share. If you're a high A dot, player, like, you may not need quite as many targets, right? To have a big air yard share. But once you start looking across all those things, then you group them, Sig. You
Hmm.
group them based on historical data, and you say, okay, this is my tier 2 talent. These are the players that check the boxes that say they are good enough talent to be wide receiver twos. And once you do that, then once you start pulling in the other data like quarterbacks and all these other things, they start to pick up signal, right? If you just look at them on the whole, they don't really have any signal. Talent is the number one driver for wide receivers. So what happens here is, I've basically, once I tier these receivers into their talent levels, that's the number one driver. And that's why all these names pop up, because it is the most important thing. But then actually stratifying them by what kind of quarterback do they play on? Like, what do we think about the offense overall? What kind of target competition do they have on their team? Those are all things that start to pick up signal. But again, talent is still the number one driver. So that's the simplest answer for a guy like Christian Watson, even though we have questions about Jordan Love. But once you add it all up for Christian Watson, it's like, okay, he was a high end target earner last year. So once he was healthy in the games where he battled injuries the first 9 weeks, then once he was healthy, he had a 23% target share. That grades out above a wide receiver 2 level over the last 3 years. And then you look at his air yard share, it was 41%. Like, a wide receiver 1 on average over the last 3 years is 31%. So he's above that mark. So he's got a wide receiver 1 mark, he's got a wide receiver 2 mark. And then you look at his fantasy points per game, 17.2. That was wide receiver 1 worthy. So the three things I care about the most, he gets a wide receiver 1 grade across two of them. But because it's a small sample, I'm like, fine, let's just call him a wide receiver
Hmm.
2 for now. But then, like, once you quantify in Jordan Love, okay, great. He only has one quarterback. I mean, he has a quarterback that has questions, but who else is really going to challenge him on this offense? Romeo Dubs was okay, but he graded out more as a wide receiver 5. People are a little bit, like, over overexcited, in my opinion, about Dubs. Not to say that he couldn't break out and still be good like that. So don't take that wrong. And like Jaden Reed is a rookie. I really like him, but he's a rookie. He's going to mostly play in the slot. So when you factor everything together around Watson, what I see is a player, but yeah, we have questions about the quarterback, but we don't need Jordan Love to be amazing because Christian Watson could easily just be the number one guy on the team, period. And if you're a quarterback that throws for 225, 240 yards per game, 235 yards per game, that's actually enough if you have one main target earner on the offense. Now, if suddenly one of those two other guys or both of them surprise us and they're really good at earning their own targets, then yes, that would potentially cap Watson. And that would be really kind of the path downward. Now, the other path downward would be as if Love's just terrible. Like if Love can only throw for 175 yards per game, even if you're the number one, right, it's going to hurt. But that's how I tier all these guys out. And so Watson, the way he leveled out was really the competition for targets it doesn't look immense. He looks like the clear number one, even though we have questions about Jordan Love.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Sorry, that was a long explanation.
Well, no, it's a good explanation, though. I mean, actually, it's a very good, clear answer to the question I asked. And the way I would summarize it is the player determines the tier they're in, and then the quarterback determines where they are within the tier.
Where they are in the tier, exactly.
Right.
How they stratify. Perfect. See, you should have cut me off and just said it that way.
Oh no, it's good.
You're so much quicker.
No, I like your Texas drawl. It reminds me of my years in Austin.
Oh yeah,
it's good. No, and I think that and the important thing about that is because that's the other thing, right? When you look at Watson, like you said, who's the real competition for targets other than like Aaron Jones? Traylon Burks. We could talk about Chiggy Okonkwo. We probably will, but still, Drake London. Maybe there's a little more compelling competition in Kyle Pitts. We could talk about him too, but still, you're still only talking about two primary targets. One of the stats I've seen going around too. Oh, by the way, you mentioned that thing real quick on the Damian Harris, Latavius Murray contracts, and I think it was Ian Hartitz who put it out there first.
It was.
Ian Hartitz is the man. Just one of the happiest people in our. We always need more happy people around us, right? And I know one of the other stats. I can't remember who brought it up first. Was that it's atrocious for opportunity as the Falcons pass offense was last year. The pass attempts went up from about 23 to 28 per game with Desmond Ridder. So I guess that takes us in. Let's get into Drake London because you had both Drake London and Kyle Pitts. So let's throw these both in there. And I think you're on the right track. I think you have the scent like a bloodhound. You're on the scent of something here because we've talked about the Atlanta offense a lot in the offseason, which well, why? What's exciting about that? But what is exciting about it is it does seem like they've built, well, it's almost a test of can you take a quarterback with what Desmond Ridder has to offer, and if you build the right structure around him, he can be at least an efficient quarterback. So you're saying, hey, Drake London and Kyle Pitts can both break out this year. How?
Yeah. So the big thing here, is that it's really hard to be as bad as the Falcons were last year.
Marcus Mariota, I'm looking at you.
Yes, it's very, very hard. And so like when you look at what the Falcons did, like only the Bears were worse, right? But the Bears and the Falcons had two of the lowest marks in the last 12 years in passing yards per game. Like they were both in the bottom three. Like so it's just just like when we get outlier seasons that are on the high end and people are like, oh, well, no way Christian Watson can score that many touchdowns again. You're right. Probably going to come down, well, the same thing can be said for outliers that are so low. And we don't talk about that enough. I think people just say, oh, it's bad offense. I'm done, And so there's a really good chance like that just on, regression alone, like the Falcons have to be better in the passing game. And like if you look at, what Vegas is saying about them, that's exactly what they're saying as well. They're like, yep, not saying they're going to be the greatest offense in the world, but there's no way they can be that bad again. And so that's the number one thing that I take with those two guys. Actually, like that's the number two thing. The number one thing is still back to their talent, right? Because if you're playing receiver or tight end, talent, especially receiver, like is absolutely everything. And whenever you look at what Drake London was able to do, and he will only be 22 this year, 27% target share last year. Like that's nuts, Sig, for a rookie. That's absolutely insane. We love talking about Garrett Wilson, who, by the way, I absolutely love. But I mean, 23% target share. You look at targets per route run, 27% versus, Garrett Wilson was at 23%. Yards per route run. This is a huge one because bad quarterback play will destroy your yards per route run. I like targets better because it doesn't depend as much on the quarterback. Like if it's inaccurate, it's like, well, okay, not your fault, man. But like at least you were good enough that the quarterback was like, well, I want to try to throw it to Drake London, right? And so London, 2.07 yards per route run and an offense that bad. Like to give you context, like if he was on a really good offense, like we can't just exactly say, hey, we airdrop him in and we know exactly what would have happened. But like that's the equivalent of like a 3, which would be astronomical. It would be through the roof.
Right.
It's the opposite of Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Not to be negative towards MVS, but like MVS plays with one of the best quarterbacks ever and like can't even sniff like a 1.5 or a 1.6. Like London's over here playing on one of the most inhibited offenses from a play calling standpoint, as far as how much they want to run the ball, and then how bad his quarterback was to be able to do the things he did. It's like it says a lot about him. Like if Drake London was playing, for I don't know anyone that was a pass first offense
Right.
with a good quarterback, like wow, like he might be in our top 6, 7 prospects for this year. But because we know we still have to deal with the Falcons and the unknown of Desmond Ritter, like that's holding his ADP down. But again, I'm buying just because ADP is also part of the equation. Like right now, you're getting, Drake London overall on underdog. You're getting him at the end of round 4, pick 48. So drafters are pretty smart, but that offense is pushing him down, 2 rounds below where Garrett Wilson is going. And I think that's fair, but I don't hesitate at all to draft Drake London. Like he's a guy I definitely want on my team. And if we want to talk about Pitts really quickly while
Sure.
we're just
Sure.
on the topic, same thing. I mean, earning targets is the number one thing. And when I really like using targets per route run, target share is better whenever you're looking, historically. And duh, because target share like is a true number. When you look at things like targets per route run, what you have to remember is like the context. Well, if a receiver only ran 50 routes, but he had a 50% targets per route run, guess what? Targets per route run is not going to correlate to fantasy points. So you have to remember those things. But once you isolate it down for guys that ran at least 250 routes, which is where that data point becomes sticky, it becomes very highly correlated with target share, meaning it allows us to go back and look across a sample for a player. Like Kyle Pitt's a great example, right? He got hurt in the season, so he missed games. You also have the fact that Arthur Smith would inexplicably just sometimes, not have him in a route, not have him on the field enough. And so all we're saying is Kyle Pitts, man, when you were actually on the field, doing your thing, like how good were you? And that 27%, targets per route run was number 1 in the NFL. Sig. That's
Yeah.
over Travis Kelsey. That's over Mark Andrews. And another guy, yards per route run, 1.69 with a terrible quarterback. Like he's going to be well over a 2 if he's playing with a better quarterback. So those are all the things that I look at. And man, Pitts is just a freak.
Yeah.
Explosive target rate. So that's catches. Those are targets that turn into receptions of 15 plus yards or more. 45%. Like now again, there's some static in that. That's going to regress, but you're still thinking about skill set, right? You're thinking about what the player was when he came out, what we saw in year 1, and in our limited sample last year, what did we see? More of the same. And 36% of his targets came 20 plus yards down the field. Like you don't get that with tight ends. This guy can attack any area of the field. He can beat you after the catch. He can be a threat inside the 5 in the end zone. I mean, Kyle Pitts checks every box. I still am a believer that it's not a matter of if for Kyle Pitts. It's only a matter of when. And this year, like if the quarterback situation is terrible and Drake London's really good too, it's going to make it hard for Kyle Pitts. But I think these two could be easily just the absolute centerpieces of the passing game. And if it improves even slightly,
Right.
like you're going to have room for both of them, to be okay.
Yeah, a lot of room for growth. A lot of room for growth. How bad was Marcus Mariota? Marcus Mariota was so
Oh my
bad
God.
that when he was replaced by a 3rd-round rookie quarterback, Arthur Smith said, let's give that guy more of a chance because maybe the passing game could be better with him. That's how bad Marcus
That's
Mariota was.
bad.
So, and that's really bad, which that should attract our attention for fantasy football because it creates a lot of room for growth. And I love how you laid out statistically that it wasn't just that Drake London got a lot of targets. Because let's be fair, there can be situations where a player can get a lot of targets because, well, there's not much else around him. And other than Kyle Pitts, there wasn't much else around Drake London. But a lot of the surrounding efficiency stats show that for a number one receiver facing number one corners in his rookie year, Drake London was outstanding. And it's the kind of rookie year that portends even bigger things. And we shouldn't get too stuck on the idea that, well, Arthur Smith's just going to run the ball and run the ball and run the ball and run the ball and run the ball. Because, well, if you had Marcus Mariota as your quarterback, wouldn't you just run the ball and run the ball and run the ball? Right? Maybe that's just rational coaching. Maybe that.
I think you have to give him somewhat of a pass, to be honest.
Yeah.
As much as I was, against Arthur Smith at moments last year, I also understand, like,
Yeah.
why.
It was
I
chicken
understand
salad.
why he did
He
this.
did it.
Yeah.
He made some chicken salad. He made them a competitive team. Maybe they can be a division winning team this year. And I think that why we're highlighting Atlanta or even Detroit, again,
Hey, Sig, one last
yeah, go
point
ahead.
on
Please,
Atlanta.
please go
Can
ahead.
I
Go
give
ahead.
you
Yeah,
one
yeah, yeah.
data point on Mariota? Because you were hitting on him while
Yeah.
we're here. Only 59% of Marcus Mariota's targets to Kyle Pitts were deemed catchable.
Right.
The average for a tight end with at least 200 routes going back to 2011 is 79%.
Right. And then he just runs.
So,
What are the numbers
yeah,
if he gets 79%, an average quarterback? What if he has
yes,
79% catchable targets? What do those numbers look
yes,
like? Certainly not falling to the 5th and 6th round of drafts.
no.
And that's the other thing is, if we're just strictly talking the game of fantasy football drafts, you don't have to really risk very much to take a chance on Kyle Pitts. And if he hits, he can hit really big. So it's that disappointment, right? Because he was a 3rd round pick with me leading the choo-choo train as a rookie. Meh. Somehow stays a 3rd round pick.
I was right there.
Yeah, well, we
So
just
I
had
was with
we
you.
hadn't seen anything like Kyle Pitts before, and like you said, it's a when
No,
situation.
I still think we haven't. That's the
Well, and
thing.
how old is he?
Nothing has changed except his situation has been so bad
Right,
that people have been burned, and
right,
they're like, "Not me. I'm not doing it again."
right.
That's essentially what's
Well,
happened,
and
in
part
my
of what
opinion.
happened to him in his rookie year was the league got the drop and said, we're treating him like a number one receiver. We're going to put our number one
When
long
they played him
fast
outside
corner.
way more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was getting a lot of attention while he was learning his way as a rookie, and now there's a lot more in terms of running game, in terms of other targets. Drake
Yeah.
London, maybe Bijan Robinson detached from the formation, et cetera, where Kyle Pitts isn't necessarily going to be the focus. We'll see if we can just get competent, even a little under league average quarterback play, and there could
And I
be
would be
yeah,
super careful with the narrative you hear. The biggest narrative I hear on Kyle Pitts is, "Yeah, well, he was given the opportunity and he didn't do anything with it." And that's actually 1000% false,
yeah,
because the number one indicator of talent for a tight end is, could they earn targets,
yeah,
right?
right,
So 27% on his targets per route run clearly tells us, like, that Kyle Pitts can earn targets. That's how we know that he's
right,
talented.
yeah,
And so be careful when you hear that one, because it would the way that argument would work would be if Kyle Pitts got to play every down and never earned any targets. Then you would be able to say, well, they gave him a shot. He
right,
couldn't do it.
right,
But it's actually the opposite.
right.
He actually blew it out of the water when he was given a chance. Just so happened the quality of targets and some other things worked against him.
Right. I think so. He got dog poop opportunity. Yeah, he got opportunity, but it wasn't an
Go
opportunity.
trade for him right now in
Yeah,
Dynasty,
right,
folks.
right. But make sure to put Jahmyr Gibbs on your auto draft in the 4th round first. Okay, real quick, like lightning round, because I want to
Check
make
and check.
I want to make sure that we get our off the rails
Yeah,
10
yeah,
minutes
yeah.
in, because it's always fun. I mean, that a lot of people say that should be the whole show. Maybe it should be real quick lightning round, because again, changing situations, changing offenses, ascending offenses. Well, 2 offenses they're going to undergo a lot of changes this offseason, and it makes it harder. Again, what did I say earlier in the show? Focus on the situation. Maybe you might not pick the right player. Stay agile, but you have at least a first guess, real quick, like kind of like 50 words or less. Why is Jerry Jeudy the Denver wide receiver to put a chip on?
It just comes back to talent again. Like, we just haven't seen a fully healthy Judy, right? But when we look at his underlying data points, it really does grade out as a wide receiver 2 with potential wide receiver 1 upside, right? We just need Russ to come back and do his thing. Sutton really grades out more as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. The other guy, the other 2 guys I'm actually the most excited about besides Sutton on the offense are, like, Tim Patrick and Marvin Mims.
Sure.
And Greg Dulcich. Like, Cortland Sutton, you can get him cheap in drafts, but Judy is the one that essentially, like when you look at it, there's been a lot going on with injuries, and the data still looks good.
Yeah, I think that Judy in the right role and everything stays on track for him health wise and kind of off the field wise, like has relationship with Russell Wilson and Sean Payton and so on. He absolutely can finish as a second or early third round value. The floor is low, but hey, they advanced him 13 million for next year. They said we'll commit to that, so they see the potential for something there. Is the answer the same for Rashad Bateman? It's just the underlying numbers and the limited opportunity he's gotten shows you that he can play.
For sure. And Bateman, the other thing is like his collegiate profile, like had he came out this year, he would have graded out, second in the supermodel behind only Jackson Smith and Jigba, but they would have been right there together. So this is a guy that had the great college profile, battled through injuries as a rookie, and he was a rookie. Like, second year, we didn't get a big sample size, but what we saw was really great. We saw a 23% targets per route run. We saw a 2.38 yards per route run, created explosive plays, all the things you want to see. And when I look at that offense, I'm like, this guy's really the most complete receiver,
Mhm.
right? He's got the size to get the target besides Mark Andrews. He's got the size to get the targets, inside the 5 yard line. He can get after it after the catch. Yeah, we're excited about Zay Flowers. You bring in OBJ as well, but like Rashad Bateman's my favorite Ravens to draft.
Yeah. Either way, we're paying close attention to these offenses. This is where we're going to start getting more information out of OTAs, training camp, preseason. But it's good to have a starting picture in your head of what you think, how you think things are going to go out, and
Yeah.
then start to compare that to what we're getting back. Okay, off the rails real quick. It was disappointing. The Dallas Stars, they came up short. I
Oh
know. I
yeah.
know a lot of people in Buffalo would say, hey, the one Stanley Cup they got was illegitimate. When they were the Minnesota North Stars, that was the Penguins' first Stanley Cup, my Pittsburgh Penguins. I guess the first question is, so football, we talk football, 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 football. Yeah, the Metroplex has all kinds of great sporting teams and sports traditions. Are you a fan of other Dallas Metroplex teams?
Yeah, I'm a supporter of the other teams, but you can call me a bandwagon supporter. When I was younger, I supported all those teams 365, right? Every day of the year.
Sure.
Like I was into it. But as you get older and you have kids, you have other things coming up. Like football was like my one that I could just stay completely dialed into all the time. And the others became like when they're playing well, like I would keep up with them, right?
Hmm.
I'll read a box score real quick. I'll see did they win or lose last night. But not investing time in watching the games and stuff until like they're in a playoff run or in the playoffs, which I've been watching the Stars. And by the way, I was on my honeymoon when Brett Hull had his foot in the
In the
crease and
crease.
they beat
Thank
the
you.
Sabres.
Thank you for
And my
saying that
wife and I were
accurately.
in Cozumel watching that game, at a bar with another couple we met while we were there that was from the area that wanted to watch the Stars play. So I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
So that was an awesome moment. But yeah, we love the Stars. I support the Rangers. We like going to the games. We'll
Oh
go to
yeah.
Rangers games. And then the Mavs are fun too. We'll see if they can ever figure out what to do in addition to Luca. It's not worked out so far, but he's masterful.
The Rangers have a good team. The Rangers are good. I mean, we'll see if it lasts. The
Yeah,
Rangers
they're
are
definitely overperforming this year.
they're
People around
legit
here are
good.
pretty nuts about it right now.
Yeah,
Like
they're
it's
legit
been
good.
baseball's been bad for a bit, here.
Well, you have to
So,
be good to get people to sit outside in Arlington in July, right?
well, it's all changed now.
Oh,
Now
it's
you've
right.
got the covered
You've got
roof.
right.
You got the yeah, yeah. So
It's
cool. Other side note: my
yeah.
son, when he graduated from high school, it
Mhm.
was COVID, and so there were no games, and that building had just been opened. So he got to have his graduation there,
Ooh,
and they got to walk down the first baseline and walk across the plate, and you got your picture on the home plate, like when you got your diploma. So COVID, all bad. He got one good memory out of
yeah.
it.
Well, it's funny that you say
Because
that.
you can't do that now because
Yeah,
the baseball games are there.
a quick story I'll convey on that note was one of my favorite moments from lockdown. Something that will stay burned. Well, two things that will stay burned in my brain forever. Like you said, memorable. Isn't it interesting? Like what lasts, right? Like if I pulled a date on a
Oh,
calendar
for
and I
sure,
said,
yeah.
"Remember something from that day," most of us would have trouble remembering something from that day. But there are certain things that will stay with us forever. And one was real quick was just during lockdown. The three of us, me, my wife, and stepson, did a bike ride around New Orleans, like through the French Quarter, etc. Like you could just go weave through these streets, Canal Street or through the French Quarter, with everything boarded up. It was very much like the classic post-apocalyptic scenario. But the happy one was I remember we rode our bikes over to Audubon Park, and there's a golf course in the middle of Audubon Park, and we got to Audubon Park, and people they still had the sprinklers on the schedule to keep the grass green. We were talking about keeping grass green earlier before we came on, and and everybody was playing in the sprinklers like it was a water park. There were kids in the sand traps like it was a sandbox. Like the people had taken back the public golf course. It's not truly a public golf course, but my point is maybe it is. But my point is, it was just one of those moments like, the earth is healing, and the animals got a lot more bold. I remember the animals. There's a lot of life down here. The animals got a lot more bold. You could tell they were just not as bothered by the presence of people, and you saw a lot more
Yeah.
animal life. Anyway, staying on the Metroplex really quick. We got a couple more minutes. Have you lived in the Metroplex for your whole life?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
So
I was born in Fort Worth. Yeah.
so
So
spoiler alert or surprise, like I might not be the most positive person with talking about the Metroplex. Okay, so you're carrying the flag for the Metroplex. What's great about living in the Metroplex?
yeah, I love the Fort Worth side. And we like Dallas too, but we don't go there as much. Like, but Fort Worth is just kind of it's a much smaller feel. When you go to downtown Fort Worth, everything is, for the most part, like everybody's super friendly. So I like that aspect of it. But like, there's so many things close when you have kids like us. So
Mhm.
like when you have kids, like you've got, Six Flags is right there. You've got multiple water parks. You've got the Cowboys. You've got the Rangers. You got the Stars. You get the Maverick. I mean, it's endless, like what you can do. And now this is changing, but there's a lot of areas you can live in where you don't have to live right in the middle of all that, right? But still be able to, you can still have access to all of it, like 30 minutes from your door.
Right.
And so we live in Burleson,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is Kelly Clarkson. That's the one thing people know about Burleson. Oh, and Matt Friedman,
Yeah.
fantasy man. Like he's actually from Burleson. I found that out like last year in Canton at the expo. We met
Mm.
and we were just talking and we started talking about Burleson and we were both looking at each other like, what? Like you're from Burleson? I'm like, yep. Um, so we have all that stuff really close. So we like that. And the music scene actually used to be pretty good. I'm not as into it anymore, but there was a lot of really good local talent, like musically. Obviously, when I was growing up in my wheelhouse, you had like the Toadies and Tripping Daisy and Deep Blue Something, and a lot of bands no one will have ever heard of that I could name. But the music scene was also always good growing up. I don't know as much about it now, though.
Yeah, right. Well, we have to focus, like you said, football, football, football. And even you got Denton too. Denton feeds a lot of great
Yeah,
music
which
into
I
the
went to, I
Metroplex.
went to North Texas, so yeah,
Mean Green, see,
yeah, Mean Green.
and that's where the Steelers will always play that. Well, we get the topper, right? Joe Green was the most famous
Hmm.
player. It's Pittsburgh, Dallas, always about that. No, and it's fascinating too. The last few times driving from New Orleans to Albuquerque, driving through the Metroplex, I'm like this area was like horse farms and stuff. The last time I drove through here was, and
It's blown up.
it is really like they're filling in all the gaps. But yeah,
That's
hey,
the part I like the least. Like I get it. It's gonna happen, and it's nothing against the people that are filling the gaps, but like you do miss them.
well, the same thing's happening in Austin. From what I hear, I haven't lived in Austin for 5 years. That there's just areas of Austin that are continuing to grow to the point where it's going to engulf, much in the same way that happened with the Metroplex. They forecast Austin and San Antonio to just kind of grow together and engulf New
It is.
Braunfels
It is. Yeah.
and
It's
San Marcos. Yeah, well,
big
Texas.
time.
I mean, there's a lot of good reasons that people have been moving to Texas. A lot of opportunity, and that's okay. But yeah, I think you're right in so much that the Metroplex is now approaching an area like the Los Angeles area or the New York metro area where there's everything you could possibly imagine ever wanting is there for you. And like you said, you can still live, 20 minutes. I just missed like Fort Worth. I just missed like a Kincaid's burger. That's all. Can you like?
Yeah, we go to Kincaid's like once a month.
Yeah. Is it still
Yeah,
the
me
old
and
like
the
the old
family.
grocery? Is it still just like the old place?
Yeah, there's still one there. That's the original, but now there are 3 or 4
Wow.
others, I believe, that have branched out. So there's one over by the Hewlin area. I know
Mhm.
nobody's gonna know what that is, but there's several
West
in the
Fort Worth.
Metroplex.
Yeah.
And they're all good. Like,
Mhm.
they've managed to keep now they keep their menu real simple, right? It's not like it's got 1,000 things on it now. It's just mostly all burgers, right, and
Yeah.
fries. So, they've managed to be able to keep, the locations good, so that's nice.
Yeah, that's always on my to-do list. Anytime I end up back in the Metroplex, and I have to swing by and see Dwain McFarland. Always enjoy
Yes, for
time
sure.
we get to spend together. You can find his work at Fantasy Life. Dwain McFarland. Context matters. That we always enjoy anytime we get a chance to spend time together And it's that time of the year when you're taking your positions, you're planting your flags. Dwayne's going to always lead you in the right direction. We want to do that for you always because you're so very classy.